start by saying good morning to everyone and welcome to RSM's second webinar in the Business Essentials series, which will focus on cybersecurity today. The Business Essentials series looks at different contemporary issues for business owners and upcoming topics. And our upcoming topics are data analytics and cash flow management, which you'll have a chance to register for at the end of this session. As we stand at the threshold of a new financial year, it is imperative for business owners or managers like yourselves joining us today to strategize and ensure you have strong cybersecurity foundations. Today's webinar aims to equip you with the necessary updates, insights, practical tips, and approaches to navigate this complex terrain effectively. Our session today will be presented by Kaustubh Vazalwar, Director of our Privacy and Security Division. Kaustubh has an array of experience within the industry, implementing and leading new innovative projects, as well as achieving a number of awards throughout his professional services tenure. Some of these awards consist of Continuity and Resilience Consultant of the Year 2015 in India, finalist as the Business Continuity Consultant of the Year in 2015, the CIR Business Continuity Awards, Program Manager for the Continuity Awareness Program, which won the DRI Excellence Award in 2013, and many others. If you have any questions for our presenter today, please feel free to use the chat or Q&A box to submit these, and we will endeavour to answer them towards the end of the presentation. If we do happen to run out of time, we'll take these offline and respond to you directly. We are also recording this session and we'll provide a link in our post-event communication, which will also include a link to our short feedback survey, giving you the opportunity to have your say on today's presentation, as well as put forward any suggestions for additional topics of interest that we can consider for upcoming events. I would firstly, before we get into this webinar, like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the different lands today in which we gather on, pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Kaustubh to commence the presentation.
Thank you, Jordan, and good morning, everyone. As Jordan mentioned, my name is Kaustubh Vazalwar. I'm a director here with Cybersecurity and Privacy Risk Services Division for RSM Australia. I welcome you all to this particular session, and as part of the session, we will be focusing on, over the next 60 minutes or so, on the essentials for cybersecurity, especially as it applies to small and medium enterprises. We'll essentially be taking a journey, and on this journey, we will be exploring the key cyber threats that organizations, especially of the size and shape that we're talking about, face today, the key challenges which we all essentially look for, in addressing these particular cybersecurity threats, some of the key implementation measures, especially as it applies to practical measures that can be implemented, especially in addressing these cyber threats, and more importantly, learning from industry case studies as to how these can be applied to real-life examples when cyber incidents do materialize. The next entire 50 minutes or so has been divided into 5 specific sections. We'll start with an overview of the common cyber threats along with the challenges that small and medium enterprises, especially in Australia, face today, and have a look at what we are essentially looking at, especially as we apply from a risk management perspective for small and medium enterprises. We'll then move on to understanding the importance of this cyber threats and essentially the focus of implementing appropriate measures from a cybersecurity point of view to organizations in the sector and the potential impact. We'll spend significant amount of time in understanding the practical measures, those which can be potentially implemented today, and the basics to manage the threats that we have just seen, and essentially look forward to having a roadmap view to managing these going forward. More importantly, the last 2 sections will focus on learning from what have recently happened as large-scale outages or events, and essentially also some key 4 industry case studies where we'll apply some of the learnings that we had up to that particular section. With further ado, I'll get started on that particular part, and on the key points of view that I wanted to make, that essentially as part of the next 50 minutes or so, we'll have 4 to 5 specific focus objectives. That includes understanding what our threat landscape is today, what kind of advanced threats that we essentially face, and the importance of that, especially to small and medium enterprises. Understanding what is needed to move on towards a wider goal of operational and cyber resilience and the key control measures which will help us on that particular journey. Having a view of the key accelerators as well as resources that are available to small and medium enterprises, especially to start working towards implementing some of the critical controls, and also having a view of what are other organizations doing with a view of those key case studies. One of the key points of view that I did want to start off with is essentially this specific and important statement. The fact is, at this particular point in time, for cyber criminals, the target is literally everyone, organizations of every sector, within every sector, for every vertical, of every shape and size for that matter. It's important for us to understand how we are essentially reviewing the key threats to our organization, understand the key critical assets and information data that we essentially need to protect, and make sure that we are putting in focused efforts towards investing in proactive cybersecurity. How do we do that? That's something we'll shortly explore over the next few slides. So let's start with exploring some of the key and most important key cyber threats. And we know, especially with the evolving technologies that we have in place, evolving, obviously, further modernization capabilities that we have in place, there are a range of cyber threats that organizations within every sector faces today. Especially to small and medium enterprises, there are about 6 to 7 key threats which are extremely important for everyone to understand. Number one, obviously, is phishing, where essentially, there could be appropriate, and there could be a number of individuals with its staff members within the organization who could be lured into essentially revealing critical data, or essentially data that could essentially exfiltrate it. Potential malware, which could take down or corrupt critical files and systems within the organization, cause performance degradation, especially for key customer-facing services, critical capabilities which are operationally important to the organization. We hear about ransomware events every single day, and that is something that is extremely chaotic to actually not only manage, but also something that could potentially completely disrupt an organization and its capabilities to provide critical services to its customers. Data breach comes with its own set of issues, right from litigation measures to having customer critically identifiable information being leaked out, being potentially misused, and the potential impact that come with it, not only dealing with obviously litigation measures, but also with regulators, government bodies, and customers. While physical access breach might not seem like a cyber threat, but I've actually assigned it here specifically to focus on how that could potentially cause an issue to protection of critical sensitive information, and we cover that as part of the controls later on as well. And then business email compromise, especially as we start working with multiple third-party suppliers, vendors, and how a business email compromise could potentially lure different staff members or vendors to essentially lure give away critical information. The range for the cyber threats over and above this, which could be important to an organization, especially a small and medium enterprise. For example, insider threat events, where a disgruntled employee could potentially leak out or cause disruption to operations of an organization as well, which are also important to consider as we look at the right set of controls and a practical set of controls to implement in the next set of slides as well. But why is it so challenging to deal with them? Especially when it comes down to small and medium enterprises, we have a range of different potential challenges as compared to large-scale organizations. And these are across a range of factors as well. We start with resourcing, especially as we are looking into working with situations whereby the budgets, the investments are obviously limited from a resourcing perspective. There is in many cases a lack of expertise to actually manage the function as effectively as end-to-end as well we would like. At the same time, considering the amount of limited investments from that perspective, we also see issues from the capabilities of detection, monitoring, and incident response in many cases, whereby those and along with obviously the weaknesses that come along with it, essentially could cause issues from a point of view of actually managing a cyber incident end to end. We are increasingly looking at organizations adopting cloud technologies and obviously modern capabilities as we provide customer services faster, farther, and more efficiently. But that's not to give away the fact that there are still organizations still dealing with legacy capabilities, legacy technologies as well, which adds further complexities and challenges as we invest to make sure our cybersecurity measures are really helping us with that end target of resilience. To add to the further complexity of the landscape, we're obviously looking at situations whereby we are using services and capabilities of our third-party service providers, either based locally within the region or based remotely outside the regions as well, which bring with it its own set of complexities and challenges as to how they manage that, along with the complex landscape and capabilities from a point of view of the modern day attacks or zero-day attacks, which could potentially bring us down. And the last part is security culture, which has essentially been a fundamental challenge for organizations to implement right set of security measures across the board, not only within small and medium enterprises, but across the board, even larger organizations for that matter, because that requires focused efforts right from the senior leadership to essentially drive down key points of view to establish a security first culture over a long period of time to kind of get where you need to be from a target perspective. And this is something that we commonly see as one of the key issues as well, especially, for example, when the Australian Securities and Investment Commission did a key survey in 2023. It was very clearly identified that small enterprises essentially do lag behind when it comes down to maturity, especially as it applies to capabilities to not only identify and protect against key cyber threat, but also ongoing manage that, govern that, and essentially recover from cyber incidents which have large scale damage across the board as well. And why is it such a big challenge? Essentially, what happens essentially? Why is it so important, and what kind of impact are we essentially looking at for organizations, especially in this space? Considering the nature of services that organizations provide today, considering the wide scale use of technologies, whether it's from a payment processing perspective, or whether it's from a point of view of accepting orders, whether it's point of view of essentially delivering capabilities, there are wide scale impact, especially when it comes down to cyber attacks. Financial losses of averaging on a basis from $200,000 and above, leading substantial issues not only to actually deal with or recover from that issue, but the long-term implications of trying to manage the repercussions post a cyber attack. Especially in the small and medium enterprises space, where there is significant dependence on the right set of positive reputation within the market as well, along with obviously working with the competition. It's important to make sure the reputation is not impacted, which can be hugely impacted especially when there are incidents such as data breaches or ransomware, where we have long-term issues from a point of view reputation as well. We've seen what happened, for example, just in the last couple of weeks, especially when it came down to the CrowdStrike issues. We've seen the dependence on technologies for a variety of capabilities that are delivered within enterprises today. Operational disruptions can be large scale. Operational disruptions can essentially take down organizations for a longer period of time, especially when cyber attacks can actually cause issues with critical capabilities and critical services. And that has led over a period of time for increasingly stringent regulatory scrutiny for organizations to continue to invest in this particular space for wider, more substantive reporting and notification, which adds its own pressure and points of investments requirements from a point of view of obviously senior management as well. Now we've had a look at some of the key threats that we face as well. We understand the importance of implementing the right set of security measures to protect our critical capabilities, our services, our information, our customer data as well. Let's look at some of the practical ways to implement some of these particular protection measures. And one of the key focus areas that I wanted to kind of share here is some of the most inexpensive, basic practical measures which can be implemented or which can be looked upon today, but also at the same time, looking at the methodology that we approach implementing the right set of cybersecurity measures over a period of time, knowing that it's a journey. We start with essentially the protection of our key files, devices, and key systems. One of the key and the most important aspects, especially the nature of the systems, applications, and key devices that we use today, is to make sure that we are ensuring the appropriate amount of security patches, updates as a dedicated process is well managed. The 3-2-1 principle, especially when it applies to making sure that we have appropriate backup capabilities of our critical folders and files, is extremely critical. 3-2-1 principle applies essentially to typically 3 copies of critical data, as far as possible using 2 different methods or methodologies, and at least 1 copy of that critical data being off-sited or away from, or disconnected from the network. So as to make sure if you have a wide scale critical issue impacting the entire network, entire system, we don't have further corruption of your backed up critical data. Well, enforcement of strong passwords with appropriate complexity has been a long-standing, well-known control. We'll be amazed as to how often we come across situation as to people still not using the right set of complexities when it comes down to passwords, and that's applicable and important to implement it across laptops or any other smart devices that we use within the organization to serve and essentially provide the key services. Encryption capabilities are now out of the box across multiple systems and applications and operating systems that we essentially use. Important to use that, especially to protect personally identifiable information. The focus, the idea is to kind of make it increasingly harder for anyone to break through and access that information, which should be limited to the right set of people based upon the right set of authorization. Multi-factor authentication, while has been obviously again recommended by a range of obviously regulatory bodies, again important to make sure that that is implemented, especially considering the importance of the various different systems we use, the various different methods that organization have staff members access the data remotely or within the organization as well, where we now need to essentially make sure that we have multiple factors being used during the authentication and authorization process so as to make sure, again, we limit the information and critical resources to the right set of people, and we make it further difficult for anyone externally. In spite of being in the industry for close to 25 years now, it is surprising, but still, very common to come across situations where organizations still don't change their default credentials when we implement new devices within the network. Seeing admin as username password or the admin password 123 is unfortunately still far too common, especially with critical network devices, switches, routers, and other devices that we essentially use within the network, potentially opening up a huge gap which could be exploited by someone who's within the network as well. And it's important to make sure these are assessed and enforced in terms of changing them as well. Almost all the various network devices in the system today come up with obviously, stronger encryption capabilities nowadays, especially for example, with the Wi-Fi networks, which are commonly used to making sure you use at least WPA2 encryption as minimum is critically important as well to make it again protecting data. When it comes down to obviously, having appropriate controls again around phishing, malware, and ransomware protection, one of the key aspects is protecting our data. We looked at backing up data, which becomes even more important here, especially the fact of having at least one copy off-sited, especially having one copy which is completely away from the main network, so as to make sure that you don't have everything lost in case something is still kind of impacted on the main network itself. Again, 3-to-1 principle is a really solid principle, still the basics, but still very important even today. Phishing, malware, especially ransomware events, they can be extremely taxing for organization and its resources across a range of different seniorities and range of different roles. It requires response right from obviously senior management teams to your technical teams to your human resources teams to obviously your finance team members. And that's why it's important to make sure that there is investment, to make sure that there is appropriate detailed plan, a step-by-step procedure, and a practice to ensure that people know how to respond to these events and how do we essentially make sure everyone knows what needs to be done considering the unique nature of this disruption. One of the key part that we miss out, especially during large scale incidents like this, is essentially the communication and notification measures, unfortunately causing long-term damage. We've seen that in the recent events in the last 6 months or the last 1 year as well. Making sure that the communication to internal and external teams is consistent, is clear, and is timely, and including the notification to any regulatory or government bodies is extremely important and should be part of the plan as well. While solutions can be plenty, right? You can have a range of solutions from enterprise risk management to ongoing, obviously, firewall management and others as well. It's important to make sure at least the basics are well implemented, including the likes of obviously our antivirus, anti-spam solution, making sure that they're always up to date, intrusion prevention, detection capabilities, as well as appropriate email authentication solutions as well. We talked about the criticality of ensuring our operating system and system security patching and security updates are well maintained and installed and tested. I think that continues to be important here as well. But at the same time, ensuring that we have a process in place to train our team members internally or using external help so that organizations have team members who know what needs to be done, who understand the importance of cybersecurity measures, their role within that, as well as the escalation measures if necessary as well. And finally, wherever necessary, to make sure that we get an independent, unbiased view to understand and review the readiness measures across people, process, and technology within the organization. I talked about physical security at this end, and while it may not seem obvious, it does continue and constitute a very important part, especially when we manage critical and sensitive information within the organization. We need to make sure that any sensitive information is not only stored securely, but also accessed securely, and it is reviewed on a regular basis as well. Especially in organizations where we do need to print out or document something which could have potentially sensitive information, proprietary information, personally identifiable information, it's important to kind of make sure as information security measures to shred documents which are no longer needed with appropriate security measures as well. Similarly, with devices and equipment which do store process sensitive information, could be internal proprietary or organization information as well, important to make sure secure disposal measures are used. At the same time, whether it's a data center, whether it's a computer room, whether it's sensitive systems really doing the processing work for you, it's important to make sure that we are investing in and making sure that the physical access wherever necessary is reviewed, is well managed, and is authorized by the right set of team members at the same time and logged at the same time as well. It's important to make sure that the appropriate physical access and handling procedures and authorization is accountable by the right set of individuals as well and is well documented. And these practices are well followed, whether it's in the warehouse, whether it's a processing facility, whether it's essentially customer service division. These are important to make sure employees across of every particular division, every location is well aware of the capabilities and requirements and essentially aware of their roles and practices that they need to follow. One of the key aspects is cyber insurance, especially as it applies to cyber risk and management around it. Now, rather than going into products and detailing around it, I think one of the key points that I wanted to make is to evaluate whether this is something that actually provides you a bit of a coverage, which is an important point of view, especially when you're dealing with large-scale cyber outages. Now, there are a range of covers that can be kind of, taken on, especially when it comes down to cyber protection measures. It's important to understand what is right for your business based upon your needs and the risk that you have potentially assessed. At the same time, it also has, in many cases, a potential positive side to it, which is essentially having access to the right set of experts from these insurance advisors, which could evaluate and advise you on your readiness and also help you make sure that all these measures are always up to date based upon ongoing yearly reviews as well. The third-party risk management aspect is very important too, and it's a fact that today we deal with SaaS products, we deal with third-party service providers, we deal with capabilities which are outsourced, whether within the country or outside as well. That risk management procedure or risk management angle, as we saw in one of the key challenges, is important to be managed as part of the key protection measures control. And it's important to make sure that we engage our leadership to ensure that these are well driven and well managed and well governed, right, from a point of view of documenting the requirements from these partners as part of the contractual documents, evaluating that over a period of time as well. And at the same time, making sure that we assess these third-party service providers, our partners, as part of not only our yearly resiliency testing, but also as part of the contractual reviews from time to time. We talked about physical access, but the fact still remains that whether it's physical access or non-physical access or access to certain files, procedures, documentation, critical data, proprietary information, important to make sure that access is obviously well controlled, well governed, and consistently reviewed, and making sure that it is on a need-to-know basis and segregated based upon the duties that are actually well divided. And finally, essentially remote access. It's a reality, it's a fact today that which we cannot ignore, that especially COVID kind of a pandemic, we have significant amount of workforce which actually either works remotely from different locations or obviously working from home or working from alternative locations from the same time to access and provide the services that are important as part of the roles. It's important to make sure this remote access does not compromise the integrity of information security controls. It's important to make sure that the right set of measures are implemented even on these specific functions as well. Making sure that we have the requirements to enforce disconnection from any, for example, unsecured Wi-Fi networks. Making sure that staff members, any working from home or remote locations, have the right set of access, remote access protocols, including likes of VPNs implemented, and making sure data is encrypted all the time during transit or at store. Making sure that any endpoint connecting to obviously any external Wi-Fi networks has the right set of updates, patches, antivirus, anti-spam solutions up to date before connecting and doing the checks on that. But also making sure on an alternative basis that we have a clear track of the inventory and it is well managed. We do not want to end up in a situation whereby a laptop or a smart device is, for example, stolen from a cafe and that ends up leaking information. We need to make sure that can be managed remotely, locked down remotely, tracked, and we know exactly how that is being reviewed on a regular basis. We've discussed multi-factor authentication, and that continues to be a critical aspect on all devices, especially when it comes down to remote access. But at the same time, the non-technical part of tech training team members, making sure they understand their roles and responsibilities with respect to information security, the mechanisms that they have in hand to kind of report or escalate certain issues when needed as well, or to come back and ask for help when needed as well, continue to be important. Now, we've talked about a range of controls, especially when it applies to the wide range of different threats that we potentially face or the challenges that we initially discover. Let's get very clear in terms of the focus of a cyber incident as well. And what I wanted to do essentially here is to bring out the focus areas which are important for every organization to understand when managing a cyber incident, whether it's before, during the preparation phase, during, or after a post cyber incident as well. In the before or the preparation phase, it's important for organizations of every size to ensure that we understand what do we need to protect, what is the most important critical asset for us, whether it could be a database of all customer file, it could be a proprietary code, it could be potentially customer, patient, sensitive information. What do we want to protect? What are the most critical systems which are essentially processing that? Based upon that assessment and the consequent risk assessment, what are the potential response strategies that we will utilize to ensure that we are able to manage an incident if and when it still does materialize? I'm personally not a big fan of vanilla approaches. It's important to make sure that every organization is unique, has its unique set of challenges, and it's important to ensure that right amount of investments are done in the initial risk assessment so that you select and nominate the right set of strategies to help you out in case there is a wide-scale incident later on as well. And that is where practicing for plausible scenarios which are unique and customized for you, and investment in the right set of solutions capabilities, could be from a people or process or technology perspective, is important. During a cyber incident itself, it's important to make sure that we are utilizing and we are driving a response which is controlled. It's important to make sure that we have a crisis management team identified earlier, which drives that response strategy based upon a well-documented plan and based upon an appropriate impact analysis, which is relevant to the business at that point in time. And that's exactly why I mentioned it's important to define the situation. What has essentially got impacted? How do we essentially recover from this? And what is the plan? And who is driving and accountable to drive that? One of the key call-outs that did come in as part of multiple cyber incidents that have happened over a period of time over the last 2 to 3 years within Australia only, if I'm ever followed that way, is clarity of communication and consistency of communication and the timeliness of communication as well, whether it's to the regulatory bodies, whether it's to the government organizations, and whether it's to the customers themselves, and including the employees as well. It's important to make sure that communication as well as employee mental health is not an optional point of view, especially as we continue to drive and work towards a crisis. And finally, after a crisis or essentially cyber incident, important to make sure that we focus away from driving blame, but rather focus away on what worked right, what did not work right, and when do we need or where do we kind of need to invest on to ensure that if we do go through something similar, we're able to recover better and perform better as well. And that's why I kind of called out the MTTI, MTTC, and MTTR, which are essentially making sure we are better in our mean time to identify, making sure we are better at mean time to contain, and making sure we are better at making the mean time to recover. Where 4 factors really help, which is essentially faster and more efficient decision making, appropriate impact analysis to the business at that point in time, good ongoing risk management measures, and most importantly, a culture with focuses on learning. And speaking of how do we essentially drive or work towards that, as I mentioned earlier as well, it's always going to be a journey, especially for small to medium enterprises, whereby there are challenges over a period of time from investment perspectives, from a resources perspective. It has to be a staged approach as a recommendation, where we start top down, starting with stage 0, where we have a strategic direction in terms of the policies, the approach that we want to take as from a senior leadership point of view, and communication of these policies and strategic direction to the organization. To stage 1, where we then focus on essentially what are the must-do items, do we identify the most critical assets as we go essentially, and then focusing on moving on to the next stage, which is essentially stage 2, which is how do we focus on the immediate protection items? How do we move on to implementing the right set of solutions, policies, and procedures to work towards protection of the identified critical assets as well? From that stage onwards, obviously, it is a maturity review and upliftment stage as we continue to kind of move on, whereby we work towards compliance and us, review against the right set of industry frameworks, regulatory guidelines, and ongoing appropriate risk management, as well as a long-term goal of uplifting that maturity, making sure that we bring in capabilities to automate and further comply and certify if necessary. But again, it has to be a staged approach. And one thing which is going to be extremely important as we work towards that is the right set of culture in an organization. I called it out earlier that that is a very critical challenge for organizations of every size and shape. And the four things that actually help working towards improving security first culture within organizations are ensuring that we drive it top down, ensuring that we prioritize that as leadership commitments and accountability, ensuring that we provide and incentivize our resources to essentially think about from a security first mindset, whether it's developing a system, whether it's developing a brand new code, or working together with our customers, or essentially working together with our third parties. Security first mindset is absolutely essential in safeguarding information. At the same time, we do not want our employees, our staff members, and our third parties who are working together with us to really get scared to actually do something from a security perspective or be concerned. We want to encourage an open reporting format so as to further foster vigilance, further foster better awareness, and further foster a security first mindset. At the same time, the only way you're going to evaluate how well you're doing from that perspective is ongoing training and awareness, ensuring that we whether use ongoing security training measures, whether it's ensuring ongoing testing of your plans, ensuring that we involve right from senior management to members of our technical staff to members of our non-technical staff, including the likes of human resources, people and culture, finance team members as well, as part of these measures is only going to help you in the long-term goal of cyber resilience. To help you out, one of the key things or key points of view that I thought would be extremely useful is understanding some of the key resources that we have in NSWAP, especially as it applies to small and medium enterprises. As we stand today, there are a range of key investments and resources that are available, which can be used so as to start working towards the roadmap approach that we discussed, just to start working towards your eventual goal of long-term cyber resilience and to really give you the confidence that you have well implemented controls to protect your most critical assets. Right from the some of the key guidelines as well as key procedure kind of checklist that you have from the ACSC within Australia today, right from checklists that can be essentially used to start evaluating or doing a self-assessment measures, your essential aid capabilities which are there, to the wider industry standards from an NIST perspective, which is National Institute of Standards and Technology, where it has its own set of dedicated small business cybersecurity center. Helps you get a dedicated risk management framework, which is focused on small and medium enterprises, some quick start guides to videos, which help you understand what's happening out in the market. How do we essentially apply those back within our organization? I've compiled some important links over the next two slides. I'll not read them out, but again, these are again focused towards helping you understand those resources which you have handy today to understand what could be used to essentially work towards those goals, milestones as part of your cybersecurity roadmap, right from your essential aid to ASD's guidelines from a small business security center to specific focus guidelines, for example, from the Victorian business community to obviously NSW Victorian business community as well. There also are certain resources that you can use online to test your cybersecurity response plans in place as well to do internal exercise as well as start planning towards incident response. Now, we've kind of seen, we've gone through a journey where I covered 3 to 4 different aspects. We understood some of the most critical threats. We understood the importance of, and the relevance to small and medium enterprises. We also understood some of the most practical measures, I would say, with some of the most basic and practical measures that can be implemented today to start working towards an eventual roadmap goal of managing these over the long term. At the same time, it's important to learn based upon what has happened within industry and understand the key insights from recent events so as to apply and evaluate or introspect as to how do we do within the organization if these kind of events happen again. The CrowdStrike outage, unfortunate incident that happened last couple of weeks ago, again, was something that really called out a range of things for organizations to rethink their business continuity plans, their IT disaster recovery plans, or overall cyber resiliency plans. Now, while I'm not going to go into why that happened or the technicalities of why that happened, I think that's for another day and discussion. We'll focus on what did it actually highlight for organizations to think about and some key questions for all of you to go back and introspect as to how would you do and how well do you do on those control measures. It did highlight the fact that organizations of every size and shape today need to think about workaround measures, especially where we have critical systems, dependencies on third-party suppliers, third-party capabilities, which could take us down, completely operationally disrupt us. There were certain enterprises which couldn't, in fact, small organizations which didn't even know this particular impact or issue till sometimes, the next weekday morning, considering obviously the small workforce. And that's where essentially it's important to understand when you detect it late or essentially detect incidents like this. Do we have a well-defined incident response plan? Do we know exactly the clear communication protocols? We don't want to come up on a Monday morning and then, not be able to start up our systems. Especially if we have large-scale dependence on our third-party service providers, important to make sure that we are engaging them on regular assessments, monitoring them, ensuring that we understand the key risks that they possess and have workarounds ready from a risk management perspective. Regular testing of our plans, whether it's disaster recovery drills or business continuity drills, continues to be equally important as well, so as to make sure the business can operationally recover in case of disruptions like that. Communications. We talked about communications a couple of slides ago as well. Continues to be an extremely critical part, making sure that we are transparent, timely, and consistent communication back to our customers, especially when we are dealing with a third-party induced outages like this. But at the same time, two key things that did get called out as really important is essentially when we go through incidents like this, our customer support and customer service teams go through a tremendous amount of stress. It's important to make sure that they are well supported, there are appropriate investments there in place, especially when they manage the right sort of crisis. And the technology members and the senior management members who are either dealing with the customers, dealing with the regulators, dealing with obviously any other bodies that are reaching out to them, making sure that when they deal with pressure situations or wide scale disruption issues like this, there is appropriate support from a mental health perspective where needed as well. So what do we think about? What are the key questions or call out for us? We need to think about within the organization. Number one, do we know exactly if we have wide scale disruptions and issues like this? Do we have clarity in terms of who is responsible for what? Do we know exactly how do we continue to stay resilient? Is there clear accountability in line of direction in terms of roles and responsibilities? It is not uncommon, unfortunately, even today, to come across situations where organizations have not seen, not updated, not kept their business continuity and IT disaster recovery plans for more than 5 to 7 years in certain cases, unfortunately. And that's an area which needs to be looked at. I think continue to focus on making sure our business continuity and disaster recovery plans are always comprehensive and up to date. Making sure that we invest and understand what is important to the business and the individual function is critically important. A warehouse requirement is always going to be different from a supply chain department requirement, is going to be different from a finance team's requirements, is going to be different from a customer service team's requirement. Do we know what's important to what department and are we planning for that? Making sure that we share that knowledge, have the plans comprehensively covering that, and training people on an ongoing basis is going to continue to be a big question for all of us to evaluate and introspect as we go along as well. Speaking of case studies, the next couple of slides cover approximately 4 different case studies of organizations who have gone through either large scale or small scale cyber incidents which have impacted them, and a point of view as to how they chose and or the areas they chose to focus on when dealing with them. Let's start with the first one. The first one is a small healthcare services firm, which essentially manages critical patient data. This healthcare services firm unfortunately faced a phishing attack on some of its employees over a long period of time of approximately 2 months, ended up compromising or revealing critical patient data. The attackers used that data for identity theft, unfortunately, and fraudulent activities. And as you can imagine, the management was held accountable. They have been questioned, and there are now serious repercussions post the event, along not only with regulators, but also with the customers and the media as well. What do we think would have been the focus for this management and the organization to do as they work around it? The organization chose to focus on 5 areas. Number one, understanding what their critical operations, systems, and data are, where is it held, how is it managed, and the controls in place. Understanding what kind of network specific as well as system security specific controls have been implemented. Are they up to date? Are they commensurate with the enough controls we need to protect the criticality of the data? Making sure that there was a clarity in the decision-making capability, especially considering patient healthcare data which is managed here, and the senior leadership form which was held accountable later on. Considering it was patient critical healthcare data, the organization continued to invest in an end-to-end response plan and ensure that it is tested on a regular basis so as to review and make sure people are aware as to how to, not reveal customer data, especially in phishing attacks. And more importantly, they chose, especially as one of the key first things, is to kind of get their readiness review measures assessed by independent, unbiased external subject matter experts so as to highlight the gaps against industry best practices. Let's look at another one. So this is a small retail business. Unfortunately, in this case, they faced a large-scale ransomware attack. All their all their sales and customer data in this case was completely encrypted. People were locked out of their systems, and the custom attackers ended up demanding a $500,000 ransom note to decrypt the data, with no guarantee they were going to get back. As you all can imagine, they came to a virtual standstill for a number of weeks. In this case, the management, focus had to deal with a number of issues there. But at the same time, the recovery was extremely long, extremely disruptive to the business, and obviously an expensive process, not only during an incident, but also post the incident as well. What do we think the organization would have done to actually, better improve on that first? They chose to identify the critical systems and the data backup capabilities. How do they store their data? Where do they store their data? Do they have capabilities to offsite in this particular case? What kind of critical systems process this data as well? And how do we ensure that the security measures are in place? Considering the unique nature of ransomware attack and what they went through, they essentially chose to ensure that they review the capabilities internally. Do they have an internal expertise at all to manage something like this going forward, or do they need to kind of leverage any external support from that perspective? Considering again the unique nature of ransomware response, one of the key focus areas was to document an end-to-end plan, which also documented the roles, responsibilities, criteria for invocation and revocation of the plans, and decision-making requirements for the senior management. But more importantly, they chose to make sure that this is tested on a regular basis, and as part of the risk management process, reviewed the status of these identified risks and on an ongoing basis as well. The third one is a tech startup. In this particular case, they had a dependency on a proprietary code based upon the technology that they were working on, which also differentiated them in the industry. This tech startup unfortunately faced a data breach incident because of poor network and security controls, which is one of the reasons that they identified later on. As you can imagine, considering the unique differentiator that they had with this proprietary code, not only did they lose competitive edge, they obviously this led to significant financial losses, reputational damage, considering some client information was also leaked here. The management here was focused on making sure that not only do they recover from this, but also they have a clear view of the readiness at that point in time and their alignment with respect to the best practices. What did they choose to do? They again chose to do a phased-wise approach in this case. One of the key things that they chose to do was essentially making sure that they identify the critical systems and network elements which support their critical services. They mapped out the interconnections and end-to-end data flow so as to know exactly how the network connectivities, network flows are essentially processed, who does access what, and how are some of the information accessed, and make sure that there is a clear view of any kind of blind spots and the security requirements against them. Again, decision making continues to be important considering it's a startup. There will be limited, obviously, senior management members and obviously limited decision taking members. So it's important to make sure there was clarity in decision making. And considering they were getting, they want to kind of regain their competitive edge over a period of time, they got their technical as well as process readiness review done obviously by independent, unbiased experts to assess them against industry best practices and advise what needs to be done. My final case study was essentially in terms of a financial services firm. This firm was targeted by malware. Unfortunately, in this case, one of the employees received an email which looked to be coming from a vendor, clicked that link, which downloaded a malware to the employee's laptop, unfortunately spread across their whole network, took down critical files, corrupted them, and also significantly degraded the performance of one of the key customer processing systems for weeks. Not only are management obviously keen in work in this case to recover from this event, but they are also concerned about compliance with APRA regulations and ongoing reporting. What would they choose to do here? They chose essentially focus on these four aspects. Number one, making sure that they get the right sort of internal and external help to ensure all traces of the existing malware are cleaned up and the existing systems are quickly restored. They reviewed obviously their existing network security measures, their system security measures as well, and training measures that are in place today so as to ensure these kind of incidents are avoided as far as possible ongoing. They ensure that they documented an end-to-end response plan, especially to deal with malware as going forward, and obviously help with the reporting back to the likes of obviously the regulatory bodies as to what their plan is and what their response capabilities are. And they reviewed the training measures as well. And most importantly, they looked at the expertise that they have internally to deal with issues like this and what needs to be done going forward, right? In case they need to bring in any specific solutions or they continue enhancing the existing controls. The key idea behind going through these four different case studies was to make sure that we understand what a firm could potentially go through, the potential impact, and essentially the areas or the approach that these organizations took when managing incidents such as these. It's critical to make sure that every organization, almost every sector, does an ongoing self-assessment to make sure we understand the capabilities that we have in place, the readiness from a point of view of dealing with the cyber threats that we just saw, not only from a point of view of governing them or having visibility of your readiness, but also your capabilities to identify, to contain, and to recover if needed from any incidents if you still go through. It's critical to make sure that we are doing this assessment on a regular basis and have a clarity of view and confidence across our people, process, and technology measures so as to give you that readiness and confidence of measures to deal with any cyber threats. Finally, as I come to the last slide, I want to call this particular point out to make sure that we went through a journey over the last 50 minutes or so, starting with having a view as to what are some of the key threats that we face today. What are some of the key challenges that we as small and medium enterprises face today, and what are some of the key measures that we could potentially take to manage these incidents as well and threats. We also learned from obviously a number of case studies and recent incidents as to what can potentially be some of the approaches that can be taken to go on that roadmap towards wider cyber resiliency journey. The fact is that today's cyber threats, the modern approach that we have, they call for a proactive cybersecurity approach, not as an afterthought, not really as a supporting measure, but something which stands as a business as usual, and most importantly, something that can be your differentiator within the market as well. I really hope over the last 50 minutes or so, the details that I've been shared have been helpful to you and really provides you a view as to where things stand. And thank you for spending your time and listening to me. Jordan, over to you.
Thank you, Kaustubh. It was a very informative session with lots of great insights. Just before we go, I do have a couple of questions. So the first question that was asked was, what do you think the main reasons are for Australian businesses not achieving cyber benchmarks?
I think we briefly covered on that, Jordan. Thank you very much for that. And I think when we looked at some of the challenges that we have today, essentially, I think that came out as one of the key aspects as well. The challenges are multifold, right? We challenges across different resources, the investments that we have in place, the challenges across obviously, complexity of the technologies that we actually work today, along with obviously legacy technologies. But most importantly, the understanding of where the investments need to be, right? So right from investments that need to be done from identification capabilities to your response and recovery capabilities, it's always going to be a challenge for a small and medium enterprise if we don't have a clear view as to where do we stand, what do we need to do, and what do we protect. So I think the challenges slide hopefully kind of focused on that, which is being one of the key, are some of the key reasons why it is increasingly difficult to achieve that cyber resilience. But at the same time, that's one of the reasons why I kind of focused on some of the implementation measures which are more practical in nature, right? Right from the kinds of password complexities to multi-factor authentication to the right set of policies and procedures. We commonly come across situations where some of these basics are not done right? I talked about not even default passwords in certain cases. Talked about not having business continuity plans or disaster recovery plans in certain cases. I think it's very common to see that these are not being well managed. If we start getting and working toward these basic practical tips over a period of time, that will definitely help work towards that roadmap.
Fantastic. Thank you. I've got a couple more questions as well, Kaustubh. So the next one was you mentioned self-assessment. Someone asked how regularly should you conduct a self-assessment?
That's a really good question. And I think the self-assessment, at minimum, I would say at least once a year. But at the same time, it's important to make sure that we understand that organizations sometimes go through large changes, right? Implementing a new project, right? Could be a HR system, implementing a brand new product at the same time. The reason why I mentioned about security first approach is we need to evaluate security related measures every time we go through these large scale changes. And from that perspective, if I kind of focus my answer, at least once a year, but in case of any other large changes that you're going through, reevaluate that. There's absolutely no harm, right? You've evaluated that, for example, let's say in January, but you go through a large scale transformation project within the organization, you implemented some new systems, a new customer delivery system, let's say in March. It's important to reevaluate your situation. Maybe your detection monitoring capabilities are no longer enough. Maybe you need to kind of change certain processes and procedures. So with every large scale change, that needs to be reevaluated as well, but at least minimum yearly is what I would say.
Fantastic. Thanks for the insight. One last question is what course of action should I take if I think there has been a cybersecurity breach?
Yeah,
I know it's a
good.
bit of a tough question to ask, but the people want to know.
No, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the key questions that everyone has at the top of the mind as well. And it's important to make sure that we have clarity on thought. And I would say rather than starting to worry straight away as to what should I do, as to what should I do after a breach, it's important to start a step back. I kind of covered cyber incident response preparedness measures as well, which is before, during, and after. It's important to start before something happens, right? As you can imagine, your investments as to what you should be doing during an actual incident could go into your preparation phase. Who is going to respond? Who are the right set of team members as part of your crisis management team? What is the procedure to actually take decisions for my senior management? What is the procedure to essentially make sure that I'm communicating to the right set of team members, whether it's regulators, my customers, putting a message out there on my website if needed, or the media if necessary, if I'm going through an incident like that. All that preparation phase helps you actually drive the actions during an actual incident, which is essentially making sure, number one, you have actions which are driven based upon your business impact on that particular point in time. You drive actions which are clearly based upon your documented cyber incident response plan, which has been prepared in the cyber incident preparation phase. You have clear accountabilities right from senior management as to who is doing what, and they are regularly reviewed during the actual incident itself. Your communication is clear, articulate, timely, and consistent, not only to your customers, but to your regulators, to any government bodies, and even to your internal team and staff members. Make sure you're taking care of your staff by providing the right sort of support, whether it's your customer support division or your employees or technical teams dealing with that during that incident. And more importantly, have a culture of not actually, putting the blame in, but actually, driving accountability. Obviously, we could discuss on it for a couple of more hours, but happy to discuss it offline. Hopefully, that covers the question. Thank you very much.
Fan-
Hopefully, the session was good.
Fantastic. Kaustubh, do you have I think that last question has generated a couple of more responses. Seeing that we have about a few minutes left, there is one question here. You don't have to go into too much detail in some of these questions we can answer offline, but someone just asked, do you recommend that clients invest in a cyber recovery solution for ransomware recovery? Does RSM help with that service?
So definitely can work offline with the clients. So absolutely, we do kind of work with our clients in terms of all the three phases that I've highlighted, not only from a preparation phase, but helping them manage incidents like that, and also helping them drive post-incident reviews as well. We also obviously drive cyber incident response testing exercises for the senior leadership members, board members, as well as technical team members as well, help them create the plans, step-by-step procedures to deal with them, and if required, actually implement the solutions if needed as well. So number one, absolutely, we can help, help the individuals needed. Feel free to obviously reach out offline, and we can, sit down and understand your key requirements and work towards the right set of ways that we can support you.
Fantastic. Well, if there's, I know there's a few other questions that have been sent through regarding services, but I would advise everyone to reach out to Kaustubh or look at our RSM website, which will be on the next slide shortly. But as a final, I just want to say thank you for joining us today, and we hope you found the session of value. I would also like to thank Kaustubh for your time and your knowledge and your experience across these matters. You can register for our upcoming sessions in the Business Essentials webinar series using the QR code provided on screen now. We'll also include a link in our follow-up email if anyone would like to watch the recording, as well as a few other resources. And you can see there that is our next webinar will be hosted on the 21st of August, which you can again register via that QR code. We hope you enjoy the rest of the day and found the information very informative. And again, thank you for your attendance, and thank you again, Kaustubh.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye.